Okay, thank you, Scott. It's always hard to follow a speaker like Scott Hanley. Thank you, everyone who made it out here tonight. Obviously, it's a very important subject, and we have a lot to talk about. Yeah, panelists, please come up. Let's get right to it. Oh, maybe I should wait a little while before the panelists come up, right? Okay, thank you. Clearly, we have a lot to talk about. Alabama has a lot to talk about. I'm going to start with some very brief introductions of our first panelists. Starting from the audience's left, we have Cam Ward. He's a state senator and a former House member. He's also an attorney specializing in economic development. As anyone who's been following Alabama's prison problem knows, he's very involved with this politically difficult subject. Governor Bentley recently appointed him chairman of the state's Prison Reform Task Force, which is expected to have policy options ready for the legislature to consider next year. Kelsey Stein mainly covers public safety and the criminal justice system for Alabama Media Group. She's been writing extensively and almost exclusively about Alabama's prisons for months. If you Google her name with the word prison, you will see that the word extensive is not an exaggeration. Her work has put her in touch with all sorts of people, with all sorts of stories: prisoners' families, convicted criminals, even politicians and lawyers. Shea Golden is an attorney and a former inmate. He was a college baseball player until he pled guilty to first-degree assault. He lost his scholarship and was incarcerated for almost 2.5 years. After he got out, he went back to school and graduated while working various full-time jobs. He's received a pardon, earned a law degree, and given motivational speeches at venues including drug court graduations and work release programs. And finally, Kim Thomas is the commissioner of the Alabama Department of Corrections. He started as a correctional trainee in 1983 and over 3 decades worked his way up through the system. He has a bachelor's and a law degree. He's represented Alabama DOC as an assistant general counsel. He was appointed corrections commissioner by Governor Bentley in 2011. Okay, again, thank you to our panelists and everyone else making this event possible. The focus of this first panel is really the big picture, the context, and where we are now. And I'd like to start off with a question for everyone on the panel, and please make sure that your face is close to the microphone. Whoever wants to respond first, feel free to jump in first. In your opinion, what's the most important issue facing Alabama's prison system right now?
Well, I guess coming from the far right side here, I'll start and we can work our way down.
Thank you.
Hands down, it's easy. I mean, it's the most overcrowded system in the country. And if you tour other systems and see what's going on, I think anyone looking at our system would say the overcrowding problem is what has led to the other problems we face, whether it be abuse allegations, whether it be questions with regard to health care opportunities, whether it be with regard to recidivism. You know, I was sworn into office in 2002. My first budget and session I participated in was in 2003. We at that time spent roughly $309 million on corrections in Alabama. This year, my last year in the Senate before our next quadrennium, we spent $460 million. Now think about that for a minute. In just a quick 10-year period, that's how much that's gone up. And it's mainly due to the large overcrowding problem we have, yet we still have the 8th highest crime rate in the country. So I would say the overcrowding issue is the largest challenge we face in our correction system today.
Kelsey.
I don't know that I necessarily have the personal experience to address this, but just judging from the people that I've talked to, I would say that I would agree with Senator Ward that overcrowding is a particularly big issue, and that seems to affect the other aspects of the prison system. And speaking to people like Shea, who we spoke about a month ago, when you look at implementing rehabilitation programs, and you need money to do that and you need space to do that, and Commissioner Thomas has told me the same thing. So I would say that just judging from everybody I've talked to, definitely overcrowding and financial issues.
Yeah.
Jay, thank you.
I think one of the biggest problems we're looking at is the fact that Alabama's incarcerating people at an alarming rate. And I don't know if that's because Alabamians are particularly prone to committing crime, but we do currently have the 4th highest incarceration rate in the nation. And if you couple that with the problem of reintroduction, we're letting people go without any special skill set to put them back on their feet. I think that we have a number of problems, those being two of them, that certainly through working together with everyone, we can start to head in the right direction in addressing these problems. I know that it's not the state's responsibility to rehabilitate the people that are in there. They run a system of incarceration, which is a punishment for their crime. However, when you're releasing people without a job, with nowhere to go, back into the community in which they were incarcerated or in which they were convicted from to begin with no money in their pocket, and I mean, you're setting individuals up for failure.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would definitely agree with everybody on the panel. Kind of begs the question, how did we get here? And Shay, you raised an important part is, we incarcerate the fourth highest number of people in the country when the United States of America incarcerates more people than any other place in the world. And, it was interesting to see the statistics that were reported at the task force not too long ago, because it shows that despite the increase in population in Alabama, the crime rate has really flattened out. The prison admissions have increased, but also, as Shay points out, we have an obligation to provide opportunities for people to improve their lives. And that takes dollars. It takes dollars coming from our Educational Trust Fund, which funds the Department of Post-Secondary Education, and the Pew Study fully supports the emphasis and the importance of prison education. So I agree that overcrowding is an important issue before us. But also, when we talk about overcrowding, or we talk about offenders, you're not just talking about the 26,000 that we feed and care for every single day. You're talking about the over 60,000 that are on probation or parole supervision somewhere out in the state. And we have an obligation to make sure that they're supervised in a way that protects public safety.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Now some questions for individual panelists. This first question is for Commissioner Thomas, but with all these individual questions, once that panelist is done, feel free to jump in and add to the conversation. Commissioner Thomas, Alabama's state and corrections officials say the prisons are improving, but recent reports and as of today, major lawsuits describe substandard medical care, abuse, and violence. You've questioned the accuracy or at least the completeness of those reports. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy here, and how is it that such different pictures of the same reality are being painted?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the pending litigation that was filed today. It's a 120-page complaint that I've not had the opportunity to review or discuss with any members of my staff. The fact of the matter is that we wanted to engage in a discussion with those advocacy groups. We wanted them to come to the table, and in fact, Governor Bentley invited them to his office, and I've sat in several meetings to try to engage in some dialogue so we can know what problems that needs fixed. I think it's a good opportunity for the fact that, I mean, the number of people in this room shows, for once, and I hate to say that it's under these circumstances, but for once somebody is caring about this important matter that's in front of us. And some of those things are what you may read. It's obviously very complex and diverse issues. I mean, we're 60% staffed. Most of our budget is tied up in personnel. Despite the fact that since maybe 2008, there has been increase in correctional spending. Overall, it's somewhat been level funded in the last several years. We do it cheaper than anywhere in the country. I think the national average in 2010 was somewhere around $70 or $80 a day, and we're doing it for $43 a day. And you can't get much programming. You can't get program space for that kind of money.
So you're saying then that there is some truth to these reports, like the Southern Poverty Law Center report. There is truth to them, but there are complicated reasons for them. Is that where we're going?
I would not comment on whether it's true or not, those allegations in the complaint. But, I mean, I'm very proud of our medical services in a correctional environment is very complex, and it's very difficult to deliver.
Why is that? Why do you say that? Why is that?
Because they're, generally speaking, there's some chronic care. I mean, remember, we're in the South. We're in the southern states, which typically, from a health standpoint, have more chronic issues with their health than other regions of the country. And then you're talking additionally about a population who some have abused their body their entire life. So when you're talking about delivering health care in a prison that was built in 1942, it's difficult to provide that care. But I believe that we've provided that care in a constitutional manner.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question. If things are improving, as you and others have said they are, how can you show it? Prisons are closed systems, so how do we really know?
Well, I think we've tried to be more transparent. Obviously, maybe sometimes members of the press don't feel like they're getting that transparent, but I've tried to be more open and available. Obviously, I've got a prison system to run and some things that I would like to improve upon, but I've tried to provide transparency in all our operations.
Okay, thank you. Now to Senator Ward. Not that this is limited to prison issues, but on prison issues especially, there's a level of distrust of state officials because of decades of perceived inaction, especially in a state that's generally mistrustful of government. Is there any way the distrust on prison issues can be overcome?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest challenge we face. The commissioner kind of alluded to this a little bit. First of all, we're as politicians, and I've been in office now for 12 years, so yeah, I would qualify as a politician, obviously. No one has ever run for office saying, man, Cam, we love you because you fix prisons. It just doesn't happen. It's just reality we live in. But what has happened over time is two things. One, and it was rightfully so in the 80s when they separated the Education Trust Fund budget from the general fund. The general fund's an anemic budget, $1.75 billion. About 80% of all your tax dollars goes to education because it was basically a distrust of politicians. We're going to do this. We're going to basically earmark 88% of all our tax dollars. And the reason that happened was because people said, we don't trust our politicians. And that's typical in the South. We don't trust any form of government. So what happens is we earmark all our money. Well, when you earmark at 88%, guess what? They have a $460 million budget out of a $1.75 billion general fund. They have a finite amount of resources, which kind of helps me piggyback into something the commissioner was alluding to, and that is, it's unfair sometimes because we say, Commissioner, we want you to run a top-notch prison system with top-notch healthcare quality and with all the guards necessary or officers necessary, and also, by the way, we want to make sure you keep the public safe. Yet, by the way, we're only going to give you about a third of what you need to pay for it. So the feat really is not at the commissioner or his officers. And don't get me wrong, we've had some instances where officers have done things wrong. But by golly, I can show you also some instances where legislators have done things wrong. Anytime you get a large group of people, you're going to have that happen. I think it's an unfair stigma on he and his department. As far as overcoming the awareness side, in my personal opinion, the single biggest challenge we have at prison reform in Alabama is we have to make people realize that we can be smart about it, and long-term, we can actually be more fiscally sound and responsible about it if we do it the right way. Now, if we don't do something soon, then I think the awareness will hit us in the head with a club as opposed to something that we can accept.
Interesting, thank you. I want to get a little more personal, a little firsthand right now. Shea Golden, prisons have been in our news and entertainment a lot lately. Do you think the media portrays prison accurately?
Yes and no. When you see shows on TV that portray the penitentiary, you're seeing a glorification of that's condensed down into an episode. In real life, I mean, you know, things that play out in prison, everything that happens on TV, I'm sure happens in prison at some point, but you know, it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen every hour of every day. It's not the norm. By and large, the penitentiary is made up of normal people in different outfits than everybody in here. I mean, these are people that made mistakes in life, and they're having to pay for it. And it's really no different than if, in my experience, if you were to take every guy in this room, put us all in one white jumpsuit, and stick us all in this same room with beds everywhere. I mean, that's essentially what prison is. The portion of it that is a little bit more accurate that's portrayed in media is the treatment of the inmates by the staff. And I'm not speaking on the lawsuit that's pending or anything, but this kind of parlays into another one of the problems that I touched on about reintroduction. We have this notion of what institutionalization is. And in the media, when we see these TV shows and these movies about this constant beratement that is received by the guards, I mean, that's a reality. Now, is it physical? No. I mean, it's not, you're not getting beaten by guards, but it is a constant thing. The constant down talk, the constant cussing, you can never get ready fast enough, you can never get to work fast enough, you can't eat fast enough, you can't do anything fast enough. And I think that that's one of the major things that needs to be changed. That is one of the things that is, I won't say it's portrayed accurately, but it's probably more accurate than the rest of the stuff that's portrayed in the media.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. Speaking of perceptions, now a question for Kelsey Stein. Did you start your reporting on this subject with one idea of what you'd find, but come out with another, or put another way, did anything surprise you?
I don't think it's specific to prisons, like the way that I report anything. I mean, I don't think that I go into any story or anything that I want to tell or report about with a concrete idea of what I want to do. I mean, if it's a coverage of an event, that's one thing, but when it's something like this where you can't predict what someone's going to tell you, you can't predict what someone's experience was like, and like Shay was saying, everyone's experience is different, so I couldn't really go into it saying this is the story I want to tell. I had to go into it saying who's going to talk to me and who has a story to tell and whose story can I confirm. And I mean, that's, like I said, that's how I approach any story, not just reporting about prisons.
You just used the word confirm. How do you handle potential trust and accuracy issues when you're interviewing convicted criminals?
The same way I handle them when I'm interviewing anyone else.
And how is that?
I mean, you have to find some sort of documentation or some sort of multiple stories of different people who have no reason to know the same story besides that it's true. Find some sort of, and one of the biggest things with these stories was court documents. I mean, those are very much accessible. So a lot of the things that people talked about we could find in lawsuits or in AL.com, which is, where you find any sort of court documents involving someone's conviction or someone's incarceration.
Thank you. Mr. Golden, from your unique perspective as a lawyer and a former prisoner, what are your thoughts on how the legal needs of inmates and society can be better met than they are being met now?
It's tough to answer that. We're now moving towards a system that with the public defender system, it's a complex. I don't know if I can actually answer that question, to be honest with you.
Fair enough.
It's I think the system is good. I do think that, in a sense, the media plays a negative part in our criminal justice system. My experience when stuff happened in my life. I was convicted before I ever stepped foot in court. And it's the stories that were run were stories that were not, that was not admissible in court. Things could not be said in court that were written in the newspaper. And after the fact, once there had been a hearing and some of the evidence had been made known, there were still stories being printed regarding information that was not true. So I know that we can't limit our media by any means, and I don't think that that is any sort of anywhere close to the solution. But I do think that the convicting up front is something that could be changed to make the system a little bit better.
Okay. Senator Ward, what needs to be done to show legislators and the people who elect them that prison issues affect everyone, not just criminals?
Well, first of all, I think the movement's going to come from the general public and not the legislature. The legislature, like any other body of elected officials in this country, are dictated by the people they represent. And I can tell you, even back home where I live, people constantly ask me, why are you talking about this? Who cares? Because like most issues, we live in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news coverage. Unless I'm impacted by it, I don't care. So you have a small bit of the population that truly engages their legislators and policymakers on it. I would say this, though, and what I have found to be a theme that I use quite a bit is the financial aspect. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that should discount some of the clear concerns with the Eighth Amendment, but what I think it does show is say, hey, look, if you don't deal with this financially, you're going to pay a price that many other states before us have. If you look at what brought Texas to action, if you brought Mississippi recently to action, the governor of Georgia spoke on this recently, South Carolina. What drove these states into finally saying, hey, we better do something, was the financial impact on their state. As I said last week when we announced the task force, it's going to get resolved. This situation will be solved. Either a federal court will do it for us, or we as policymakers will do it for us. And if we truly are a state that loves to preach on the 10th Amendment, then I would hope as state lawmakers we would handle a state problem ourselves. But that's going to be, that's the true test for all lawmakers, I believe.
So are we basically at this point right now, are we basically at the point where if the legislature doesn't really get something significant done next year, then it's the feds are going to come in? Is that what you think?
I think if you look at the Plata decision in California, and I call it the you get reprimanded, then you get punished. What happens is the first time the court comes in and says, by the way, you will clean up your act, you will reduce population, you will fix these X, Y, and Z concerns, or we're going to come in and take you in receivership, as they did in Alabama in the late 1970s. Where I think we are is they're waiting to see, in my opinion, if I were a court. I think they are looking to see what will you guys do in 2015 legislative session. If there's a show of political will, I don't think you have, first of all, I don't think you can solve it in one legislative session. I don't think it's possible. We're too far in that hole. But I think if you show you've shown political will to address it as far as making certain changes, I do believe we can avert a federal lawsuit. But now, it's not going to happen in one session. I think we're a 3 or 4 session progress in getting something done.
Please.
It seems that the solutions to some of these problems are not actually addressing the problems. When we deal with the overcrowded situation, which obviously will at some point end up being a topic, it's been touched on a little bit, our solution to dealing with the overcrowded problem is to let go, or to release the nonviolent offenders.
Which would be a mistake, yeah.
Right. Well, we release these nonviolent offenders, and these are the offenders with the highest recidivism rate across the board, not just in Alabama, but nationally. And I don't mean just by a little bit, I mean substantially higher. The people with public order offenses, the offenses involving drunkenness, involving violation of probation, paroles, things such as that, drug offenses, property offenses, these offenses are the ones that we let go because the public will allow us to let these inmates go, whereas our violent offenders, those that have done substantial amount of time, have shown across the board that they are less likely to reoffend after doing time once they're released onto the streets. I mean, and these are studies that have been done that reflect 1 year out, 2 to 4 years out, 5 years out, and after. And the numbers, I mean, 56% of people, when they're released, go back to prison within the first year. These are the people we're letting go so that we can now ease the overcrowded population problem. Well, when they come back in the first year, now we have the new inductees into prison and the 56% that we've already let out. The number drops the longer that they're out. And if we would look at who we're letting go, and I know it doesn't sound good to say that we need to release someone that was convicted of assault. I know that doesn't sound good, but those are the people that aren't going back. If we release someone from a 15-year-old homicide or 20-year-old homicide that they've already done 15 or 20 years on, it doesn't sound good to release them, but those people are not coming back. The drug offenders, the property offenders, and the public order offenders are the people that have had 5 and 6 and 15 and 25 chances, and then when they finally get behind the fence, they're there for 6 months and we turn them right back out. That message is not telling them that they need to change their pattern of behavior at all. Versus the people that have been in there for a substantial amount of time, they know I have to change my behavior.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's falls within a topic that was brought up during the task force by the presentation by the Council of State Governments, and that is the whole idea of needs responsitivity. You know what the criminogenic traits are of these people. You can predict with science validated who is a low risk and high risk offender, and it's just like prescribing medicine. You've got to give the medicine to the right people in order to make them healthy. So, we have done this in the Department of Corrections through the use and incorporation of the Ohio Risk Assessment System, or the ORAS. We've piloted it with a Jefferson County reentry program. We partnered with UAB Task. So these are the types of things that I think we need to start looking at statewide, because there is a better way of doing business, and there is a better way of protecting public. And then secondly, I would like to respond to what Shay said about officers' treatment of offenders. In my 30 years, I have always, and I've walked in maximum security facilities before, I've always gotten my job done because I was a professional and I carried myself in a certain way. And that's what I expect from my officers. And if I look back, one of the legacies that I would like to leave is that our employees do not disrespect another human being, are not insubordinate towards somebody, that they act in a manner that shows a high professional standard and their expectations. That is, if there's one thing that I would like to change as commissioner, it's those incidents that you talk about, Shay, because I think that does compound over time and has a negative consequence. But so I really do believe in treating people with respect. And that is one thing that I want to make sure that my officers understand. And if they don't understand it, then they will be punished. And we will make sure they understand that that's my expectation.
Okay. I'm glad we have such a wide spectrum on this panel, because we've got someone who has to implement these policies. We've got people who have experienced it on different ends. We've got people who are involved in shaping the perception of these policies. And then we've got someone who really knows about the politics of it. Based on something that Shay said before, releasing violent criminals after so many years doesn't sound good. A lot of these programs that you think might work, they don't sound good. Taxes, it doesn't sound good. So realistically, when you look at the whole equation, it doesn't really paint a very hopeful picture. And I admire everyone here for sort of getting past that hopelessness and trying to get other people to do that. But is it realistic? How can we do that given the variables that you've been talking about in the last 10 minutes?
Well, let me say this to you, and you're threading a needle. I'm not going to fool anybody in this room. There may not be anybody here from my district. I can tell you, I am the second most Republican district in the state of Alabama. in order to win my district, there are no Democrats left. You either have to win the Republican primary or you don't win at all. And so, I mean, it's who's the most conservative. But what I would say, here's where I see your angle being at. One, I think there are a lot of opportunities for an increase in use of drug courts. I think there's a lot of opportunity for an increase in use in community corrections. These are programs that, one, reduce recidivism, and two, are cheaper. I mean, come on, that's as simple as can get. However, if we boil this argument down to reform, and this is, again, I haven't been in Shay's position, so I can't speak from his point of view, or in the Commissioner Kelsey's position, but let me say this. If the argument comes down to, in 2015 when we debate this, if the politics of this comes down to how many violent offenders should we release earlier than we should have, we will not have reform. And I tell you that because I want us to have reform, but I also know what's reality in the state of Alabama. And I'm just telling you, I know, and I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart, if that becomes the basis of our fundamental argument of why you need reform, we will not win.
So are you saying it needs to be spun differently?
No, I don't think it needs to be spun differently. What I think there needs to be an emphasis on a lot of proven programs out there that other states have adopted. Other states have adopted a massive uniformity in community corrections, which provides rehabilitation, provides opportunity for work and skill development, and also provides some reentry opportunities so that you reduce your recidivism, and again, it costs less money. So I think that's the angle we take. And again, I may be a minority viewpoint on that, but I really believe that's the angle to reform. I think that's the one that we can sell, not just to those of us in this room who are activists, but those of us who are voters and the people of the state who are going to have the final say.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at what Texas did. I mean, when they reduced the number of parole and probation revocations, when I talk about probation revocations, I don't mean just solely misdemeanors or felony. I mean misdemeanors as well. When you can do what Texas did and reduce through good sound practices, proven methods that have shown to be worthwhile, when you can reduce that by 10%, that is the way you start slowly nipping away at this problem and these issues. You're never going to get to 0% recidivism rate, but if you can drop it from 32 to 27, you're making progress, and I think that's some of the piecemeal things that we need to start doing and have done.
Shay?
Well, the implementation of this, though, really just ends up being a Band-Aid, because what happens is we show a reduction in the revocation of parole, or the revocation of probation, but there's no change in behavior. It's not like the people have now all of a sudden quit committing crimes. It's now they're given more opportunities not to be revoked or not to be violated, as it's commonly said. At some point, we need to address the available options of messing up. I mean, we have so many ways that we punish a sickness here in Alabama that really draws a question as to, are these people reoffending, or are they just sick and need help? One of the biggest, I mean, we incarcerate possession of marijuana. I won't even single one out. We incarcerate drug offenders while we label them as being addicts and saying that addiction is a disease, yet we punish them for it. And you can tie drug offenses in to property crimes, to violent offenses, to obviously your public order offenses, and these are the things that are getting people revoked from probation. Burglaries, robberies, I mean, these and homicides are all directly related. The numbers that I was showing when I did my research on this in terms of the people to release, by and large, 24 years old and younger, within 3 years of being released, have a 75.9% chance of going back. Those are your most drug offenders. Those are your most commonly in and out of the system, whereas 40 and over don't. So if you don't look at violent offenders, because obviously, I mean, just being honest, it would be hard to run a campaign if you're saying let's release violent offenders. But if you just looked at older people, those are the people you release. If you look at addicts that are having problems with sickness and disease, those people need to be treated, not punished. And until we start treating these people, they're going to continue to clog our prison system.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we are sort of running out of time, and I do want to get to some audience questions. This one's directed towards Commissioner Thomas. Why is there seemingly no accountability for correction officers who are involved in sexual misconduct with inmates? Has anyone been charged?
Yes, people have been charged. We investigate those cases. By law, we refer those to the district attorney for prosecution, and we cooperate fully with the district attorney's office by providing evidence, witnesses, any access they need in order to prosecute their case. And then it becomes a matter of the district attorney's office, and obviously you have a judge involved in that case, you have a defense lawyer assigned to that case, but there's been people charged, there's been people who've been found pled guilty, and there's been people who have punished. I agree that they have not been punished severely enough to send a signal to the people that are in charge of these offenders in Alabama that this is something that cannot be done, but that is a matter for the courts. That's their function, not the executive branch, but I fully support prosecution of those.
Kelsey, do you have something to add?
I mean, we have reported a lot on the charges against officers who have been, and I will say that the governor's office has been very forthcoming with that information, and we haven't been able to get it from some of the court systems. But I do think that a little bit of transparency would go a long way, and I understand the issues that y'all face with that. But that's been one of our issues with reporting on it, is that, you know, getting these investigations and getting the records about, you know, what's happening with these people who are referred to the district attorney's office but aren't necessarily convicted of something, but they are punished within the system.
Okay, thank you. One more audience question, and you can address this to the whole panel. Do you feel that the three-strike rule should be revisited? Should it be only used for violent crimes, not just drug crimes?
If I may, I think that the whole thing needs to be reworked. The fact that the three-strike enhancement, while statistics show that those that have been arrested more than 4 times substantially increase their chance of going back. And I understand the need to address those statistics, but I think that if we're going to add the three-strike rule, if we're going to re-implement the three-strike rule, we also need to address the scarlet letter that those of us that don't reoffend have to continue to carry, because I think those are going to be directly correlated. If the people that have had 4 or less priors have a 30% lower recidivism rate nationally through a 5-year period than those that have 10 or more, that 30% holds true all the way across. So 3 strikes might be not quite accurate. Maybe 4 strikes would be a little bit better. But you also have to look at the people that have never had another strike that are continually punished as a felon. In the courts, 10 years is as far as you can go back on introducing evidence of a prior conviction. So I think 10 years would be something that would help people on that felony conviction too.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, HOA, and that's Habitual Offender Act. We all use abbreviations these days. But HOA really, first of all, it's not as big a percentage of your population as you think it is. I thought it was bigger until the Council of State Government came in and started doing some of their statistics. However, I would say this. I think that any reform effort is going to evolve. You're going to have to include revisions to HOA. It's the notion that I get caught for bad checks, drug possession, and then I'm in life. That's just a goofy system. That's just stupid. The idea behind HOA when we first started it, and this was, I hate to say this, when I was a kid, this is in the early 80s. What happened was, the idea was you were trying to crack down on those who were perpetually hurting someone else in society. If I'm doing a bad check and a drug possession or something, you could get HOA easily without it'd be a victimless crime. So I think you have to look at it. I don't know how much of a change it would make in the overall population, but I think any reform effort that doesn't look at it is silly.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Thomas?
Yeah, I agree that I'm not really very knowledgeable about the sentencing, and you're probably more qualified than Senator Ward is as well. But I think everything needs to be on the table when we start looking at things. But secondly, to sort of chime in what Shay said, our laws and our society's approach to ex-offenders, we can't. Our perspective on them cannot be that they're second-class citizens. They paid their debt, they've served their time. And we need to be creating opportunities for them to succeed as opposed to the scarlet letter that you place on an ex-offender.
And Shay made one good point, I'll finish up here, is that Shay made a very good point. When you look at ex-offenders, one of the in my opinion, one of the most dangerous things that we do as far as ex-offenders is the denial of a driver's license for a certain period of time. Well, how can I expect this person who's been convicted and released, I say, by the way, I want you to be a productive citizen, but you can't drive a car? Well, they can't get a job. I mean, that's a small example, but that's the kind of policies we do need to look at as far as post-release goes.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Due to the hard reality of a ticking clock, we're going to have to close out this panel here. Thanks again to the panelists and to our audience for a, at times, difficult but thought-provoking conversation. We're going to take a very short break, and then we're going to start a second panel discussion, which will focus on rehabilitation. Thank you, and please give a hand to our panelists.
Thank you.